the Scarlet Omega. Sera had survived 23 days in the fighting pits, longer than any Omega in the Empire's history. Today, they would sell her to the highest bidder, and she planned to kill whoever bought her. The morning sun beat down on the massive Colosseum as guards dragged her from the darkness below. Her wrists bled where the iron shackles rubbed against old scars. She didn't care. Kaine was an old friend now, more reliable than any person had ever been. The crowd roared when they saw her. Thousands of faces blurred together. Alphas in expensive togas, soldiers in gleaming armor, merchants eager for entertainment. They'd come to see the impossible, an Omega who fought like a warrior, who'd killed 3 opponents in the pits and refused to submit to any Alpha who tried to claim her as a prize. The auction platform rose in the center of the arena, marble steps leading to a stage where sunlight caught particles of dust in the air. Sera's torn silk robes, once white, now stained with blood and dirt, hung from her shoulders. She kept her chin high, amber eyes blazing with defiance even as the auctioneer began his speech. "Gentlemen of the Valdran Empire." His voice echoed across the stones. "Today we offer you a treasure unlike any other. An Omega with the spirit of an Alpha, unbroken despite weeks in our most brutal pits." The bidding started at a price that could buy a small estate. It climbed rapidly, wealthy Alphas shouting numbers, trying to outdo each other. They didn't want her for companionship or even pleasure. They wanted to own the impossible, to break what others couldn't. Sera studied them all, memorizing faces. She would remember every single Alpha who bid on her freedom like it was a commodity. If she survived what came next, she would make them remember her too. Then she noticed him. A massive figure stood in the shadows beneath the eastern archway, partially hidden by a stone column. He wore black armor that seemed to absorb light, and he hadn't moved once since the auction began. While others shouted and gestured, he simply watched her with dark, unreadable eyes. Something about his stillness made her skin prickle with warning. The price climbed higher. 10,000 gold. 20,000. Enough to feed an entire city district for a year. The crowd began to murmur. Surely no one would pay more? The figure in black raised one finger. The Colosseum fell silent. Every head turned toward him. Sera watched as even the auctioneer's face went pale. The man stepped forward into the sunlight, and gasps rippled through the crowd. Commander Kaine, the Blood Wolf. The Emperor's most feared general, the man who'd conquered 3 kingdoms and never lost a battle. Sera had heard stories about him even in the pits, how he showed no mercy, how entire armies surrendered rather than face him, how he collected rare and dangerous things. 50,000 gold, his voice rumbled across the arena, deep and final. No one else bid. No one dared. The auctioneer swallowed hard. "As sold. To Commander Kaine." Guards surrounded Sera immediately, 6 of them for one chained woman. They clearly knew her reputation. As they dragged her down the steps toward the black-armored Alpha, Sera's mind raced. The knife on his belt, silver handle, worn leather sheath. She was fast. If she could get close enough, if she could catch him off guard for just 1 second. Kaine didn't move as they brought her before him. Up close, he was even larger than she'd realized, easily a foot taller than her, with shoulders that spoke of years wielding a sword. His face was partially shadowed by his helmet, but she could see a strong jaw, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, and those dark eyes that seemed to look straight through her. "You have fire in you," he said, his voice a low rumble that she felt in her chest. "Good. You'll need it for what's coming." Before Sera could respond, before she could spit in his face or make her move for the knife, horns blared across the city. The sound was wrong, urgent, the pattern reserved for only the gravest emergencies. A messenger ran into the arena, his face white with terror. He fell to his knees before the assembled nobles, gasping for breath. "The Emperor," he shouted, his voice breaking. "The Emperor is dead. Murdered in his sleep. The palace is in chaos." The crowd erupted into panic shouting. Nobles scrambled for the exits. Soldiers ran for their posts. The entire Colosseum became a swirling mass of confusion and fear. Kaine's hand shot out and gripped Sera's chains. His eyes locked with hers, and for just a moment, she saw something unexpected flicker there. Not cruelty or hunger, but something that looked almost like recognition. As if he'd been searching for her his entire life, and only just now realized it. "The Empire is about to tear itself apart," he said quietly, his words meant only for her. "And you and I are going to be right in the center of it." He turned and strode toward the exit, dragging her behind him. Sera stumbled, then found her footing, her mind reeling. The Emperor dead. The Empire in chaos. And she was now the property of the most dangerous alpha alive. She glanced back once at the auction block, at the blood-stained fighting pits below. She'd survived 23 days there by being smart, fast, and absolutely ruthless. Whatever came next, she'd survive that too. Or die trying. Chapter 2. The Warlord's Bargain. Kaine's camp sprawled across the hills outside the capital like a sleeping dragon. 10,000 tents, war machines, and soldiers who moved with the discipline of men who'd seen real combat. Sera had expected to be thrown into a cage, maybe locked in some dark corner to wait for whatever cruel plans he had. Instead, the guards brought her to his command tent. It was massive, crimson and gold fabric walls stretched over a wooden frame, rich carpets covering the ground. Maps covered every surface, battle plans, troop movements, supply routes. Weapons hung on racks along the walls, swords, spears, axes, each one clearly used and well-maintained. This wasn't some nobleman's decorative collection. These were tools of war. Kaine stood with his back to her, studying a map spread across a heavy wooden table. Oil lamps cast flickering light across the space, creating shadows that danced on the walls. "Sit," he said without turning around. Sera remained standing, her chains clinking. "I'm not a dog." "No," he agreed, still focused on his maps. "You're not." He gestured to a chair covered in furs near the table. "Which is why I'm asking, not ordering." It was such a small thing, the distinction between a command and a request. But Sera had spent years having every choice stripped away, every action dictated by others. The fact that he bothered to acknowledge the difference made her hesitate. She sat, but kept her body coiled and ready. The knife on his belt was still there. She just needed the right moment. A servant entered with wine and food, real food, not the scraps they threw to pit fighters. Fresh bread, cheese, roasted meat. Her stomach growled traitorously. "Eat," Kaine said. "You'll need your strength." "For what?" "Your bed." The words came out sharp and bitter. Finally, he turned to face her. With his helmet removed, she could see him fully. Younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with dark hair cut short and more scars than any man should have. His eyes were deep brown, almost black, and held a weariness that spoke of too many battles, too many deaths. "I'm not going to force you," he said quietly. "But I'm not freeing you either. Not yet." Sera's laugh was harsh. "Every alpha says they're different. Every single one. Then they prove they're exactly the same." Kaine's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. The Emperor's death wasn't random. Someone is hunting Omegas with abilities. Special ones. Like you. The bread turned to dust in Sera's mouth. She forced herself to swallow, to keep her expression neutral. But her mind was racing. The fighting pits weren't just entertainment, Kaine continued, moving to the table and pulling out a scroll. They were testing grounds. Ways to identify Omegas with enhanced strength, speed, senses. You survived 23 days because you're stronger and faster than you should be. You have gifts that most Omegas don't. So what? Sera shot back. You going to study me? Turn me into some kind of weapon? No. He spread the scroll on the table. It bore the Imperial seal. Someone else already did that. To a lot of Omegas. And now they're using them as assassins. The Emperor was the first target, but he won't be the last. Sera stood slowly, the chains dragging across the carpet. You're lying. Why would anyone? To start a war, Kaine interrupted. Not between kingdoms, but between alphas and Omegas. Real war. The kind that burns the Empire to the ground. He looked at her directly, and she saw the truth in his eyes. Someone is turning Omegas into weapons that can't be detected by Alpha senses. They've found a way to erase something fundamental. And whoever's behind it is very, very smart. Why should I care? Sera's voice came out harder than she intended. Your kind made us slaves. Maybe the Empire deserves to burn. Maybe it does. Kaine's admission surprised her. But thousands of innocent people, Alphas and Omegas both, will die in the flames. Children, families, people who never chose the system any more than you did. He reached into his armor and pulled out a second scroll, this one sealed with his personal mark. Help me find who's behind this, and I'll give you something no Alpha has offered an Omega in 300 years, a choice about your own fate. Help me stop this, and when it's done, you decide what happens next. Freedom, wealth, a place in my house with full rights, or I'll give you a horse and supplies and you'll never see me again. Sera stared at him, searching for the trap. There was always a trap. Alphas didn't give choices, they took them. But his expression remained open, honest in a way that made her chest ache. He looked tired. Not just physically exhausted, but soul-deep weary, like a man who'd spent his whole life doing things that haunted him. Outside the tent, soldiers chanted war songs. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. The normal sounds of a military camp at night. Inside, an Alpha and an Omega stood on opposite sides of a table, the weight of an empire's future between them. One condition, Sera said finally. These chains come off. Now. Kaine reached for his belt and pulled out a key. He'd had it the whole time. Of course. He moved around the table toward her, slowly, giving her space to move away if she wanted. When he reached her, he knelt. Actually knelt, putting himself at eye level with her shackled wrists. The key turned in the locks. The iron fell away. Sera rubbed her wrists, feeling blood flow back into her hands. She could run now, could grab that knife and try to fight her way out, could do any number of things. Why? She asked quietly. Why do you really care about this? Kaine stood slowly, and for a moment, pain flashed across his face, raw and real. My mother was an Omega. My father took her as a war prize after a conquest. She never smiled, not once in my entire childhood. When I was 12, I found her walking into the ocean. She never came back. His hands clenched at his sides. I've spent my entire life enforcing laws that killed her spirit. Conquering cities, claiming territory, strengthening an empire built on suffering. Maybe it's too late for redemption. Probably it is. But I have to try. Sera felt something crack in her chest, a tiny fissure in the wall she'd built so carefully around her heart. She'd expected a monster. Instead, she'd found something infinitely more dangerous, an Alpha with a conscience. I'll help you, she said. But if you betray me, you'll kill me, Kaine finished. I know. I'd expect nothing less. He extended his hand, not in dominance, but in partnership. An equal gesture she'd never seen an Alpha offer an Omega. Slowly, carefully, Sera reached out and took it. His grip was warm and strong, calloused from years of holding weapons. And for just a moment, she let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Chapter 3. The Hidden Village. 3 days of hard riding through mountain passes brought them to places Sera had only heard about in whispered legends. Kaine had insisted on coming alone with her. Bringing soldiers would be seen as an invasion. They traveled light, dressed in simple traveling clothes instead of armor, looking more like refugees than a general and his, whatever Sera was now. Partner, she supposed. The word felt strange. The whispering mountains rose around them like the bones of ancient giants, peaks disappearing into clouds, valleys so deep that sunlight barely touched the bottom. This was wild country, unmapped by the Empire, home to creatures and secrets that most city dwellers thought were myths. Sera had thought the free Omega villages were myths too. Then Moonhaven appeared through the morning mist like something from a dream. It was carved into the cliffside itself, terraced gardens spilling down the rocks in cascades of green, Traditional timber houses with curved roofs that seemed to grow organically from the stone. Waterfalls poured down from heights above, their mist creating rainbows in the early light. Prayer flags in every color fluttered in the breeze, and the air smelled of flowers and fresh bread. It was beautiful. It was impossible. And it made Sera's heart ache with a longing she hadn't known she still possessed. "People live here," she whispered. "Free people." 300 years, Kaine said quietly beside her. The Empire never found them. Or maybe,
He paused.
maybe some emperors knew and chose to let them be. A secret mercy. They approached on foot, leading their horses. A hidden gate carved with Omega symbols, circles within circles, the old mark of the Mother Goddess, stood before them. Before they reached it, figures melted out of the mist. Warriors. Omega warriors, women with bows drawn and arrows pointed at Kaine's heart. They moved with fluid grace, surrounding them in seconds. "An alpha in the sacred mountains," one of them said, her voice cold. "Give me one reason not to put an arrow through you right now." "Peace," Sera called out, stepping in front of Kaine. "I was a slave in the Empire. He freed me. We need to speak with your elders." The warriors didn't lower their weapons. One of them, a woman with silver-streaked hair braided with beads, studied Sera with sharp eyes that saw too much. "You smell of the pits," she said, "and of him." Her gaze shifted to Kaine with open hatred. "Why should we trust any alpha?" "Because he's telling the truth," Sera said urgently. "And because Omegas are dying, being taken and changed into something wrong." That made them pause. The silver-haired woman, clearly the leader, gestured sharply. "Bind the alpha. If he resists, kill him." Kaine raised his hands slowly. "I understand." They bound his wrists with rope that looked delicate, but held with impossible strength. Two warriors kept arrows trained on him at all times as they led them through the gate and into Moonhaven proper. Sera couldn't stop staring. Children played in the streets. Omega children, laughing and free. Markets bustled with activity, people trading goods, living normal lives. No fear in their eyes. No chains anywhere. This was what the world could be. What it should be. Elder Lyris met them in a grove at the heart of the village, a sacred space where ancient trees grew in a perfect circle. She was older than time itself, her silver hair unbound and flowing to her waist, her face lined with wisdom and sorrow both. Despite her age, she radiated power that made the air feel heavy. "An alpha in Moonhaven," she said, her voice like rustling leaves. "Explain quickly why I shouldn't have you killed where you stand." Sera stepped forward. "Because he's telling the truth. Omegas are being taken, changed into something else. I was in the Empire's fighting pits. They're not just entertainment. They're testing grounds, looking for Omegas with special abilities." She described everything. The whispers she'd heard, the rumors of Omegas who'd vanished and returned different, the way some fighters moved with unnatural speed or strength. Kaine added what he'd learned from his intelligence networks, disappearances across the Empire, always Omegas with some kind of gift, and never a trace left behind. Elder Lyris's face paled with each word. When they finished, she was silent for a long moment. "The nullification ritual," she finally whispered. "We thought it was just a horror story. A warning tale we told to keep our young ones safe." She gestured for them to follow, leading them deeper into the grove to where ancient stone tablets stood, covered in script so old it predated the Empire. Our ancestors knew forbidden magic. Spells that could sever an Omega's bond ability, the very thing that connects us to the world's energy. It would make them empty, invisible to alpha senses. Perfect assassins. Sera felt ice in her veins. "You're saying someone found a way to actually do it?" "6 of our daughters have disappeared in the past year," Lyris said, her voice breaking. "We thought they'd been captured by slavers. Sold to the Empire. We've been trying to track them, but..." She looked at them with ancient, grieving eyes. "They're already gone, aren't they?"
"Changed."
Kaine did something then that shocked everyone present. He knelt before the elder, a gesture of profound respect that no Alpha gave to any Omega, let alone one from a free village. "Help us stop this," he said. "Give us whatever knowledge you have. And I swear on my blood, on my honor as a warrior, I'll use my position to begin dismantling the slave trade. I can't fix everything. I can't undo 300 years of wrong, but I can start making changes." The warriors around the grove shifted uneasily. Lyris stared at him, her blind eyes somehow seeing straight through to his soul. "Pretty words from an Alpha general," she said finally. "We've heard promises before." Then she looked at Sera. "But she trusts you. And that girl's eyes are hard with too much pain. She wouldn't trust anyone without reason." The elder's expression became steel. "Very well, Wolf. We'll help you. But know this. If you betray us, if you betray her, no army will save you from an Omega's vengeance. We have magic you can't imagine and patience you can't comprehend. We will find you." Kaine met her gaze steadily. "If I betray her, I'll deserve everything you do to me." Lyris nodded slowly. "The ritual's details are in our archives. You'll have them. But understand, breaking this magic won't be easy. The only counter to a spell that severs bonds is a bond so strong it can't be broken. A true bond, formed not by nature or force, but by choice." Sera's breath caught. True bonds were legendary, the kind of connection between Alpha and Omega that transcended biology, built on mutual respect and real love. The Empire considered them perversions, unnatural aberrations of the proper order. "They're incredibly rare," Lyris continued. "Perhaps a dozen in the entire history of our people. And to use one to break the nullification ritual." She shook her head. "The cost would be immense." "We'll pay it," Sera said before she could think better of it. She felt Kaine's eyes on her, but didn't look at him. "Whatever it takes." The elder studied them both for a long, waited moment. Then she smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Perhaps you already have what you need, child. Time will tell." They spent the rest of the day in Moonhaven's archives, copying information about the ritual, learning its signs and symptoms. The nullification stripped away an Omega's scent signature, their ability to form bonds, even some of their memories. It left them emotionally hollow, perfect blank slates to be programmed as weapons. As the sun set and they prepared to leave, Sera stood at the edge of a terrace, looking out over the hidden valley. Kaine joined her, silent for once. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for believing me enough to come here, for speaking up for me." "Don't thank me yet," Sera replied. "We still have to find these assassins. Stop whoever's behind this." She paused. "Save 6 girls who might already be lost." "We'll save them," Kaine said with a certainty that surprised her. "All of them. I promise you that." Sera wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in his strength, his conviction. But she'd learned long ago that promises were easy to make and hard to keep. Still, as they rode back down the mountain in the darkness, she found herself thinking about true bonds, about what it would mean to connect with someone so deeply that even forbidden magic couldn't sever it. And she wondered, just for a moment, what it would be like to trust someone that much. Chapter 4. The Assassin's Mark. The capital was chaos when they returned. 3 senators had been murdered in the week they'd been gone, each one killed in their own homes despite heavy guard presences. The city buzzed with fear and paranoia. Alphas accused each other of conspiracy. Omegas whispered about revolution. The Empire was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Kaine brought Sera to the latest crime scene, a luxurious bathhouse owned by Senator Aurelius, a moderate who'd been pushing for Omega education rights. The man had been found floating in his private pool, his throat cut so precisely he'd barely had time to realize he was dying. Imperial guards tried to stop them at the door, but one look at Kaine's face, and the commander's seal he carried, made them step aside quickly. Inside, the bathhouse was a marvel of marble and gold, steam still rising from heated pools, rose petals scattered across the water. Beautiful and peaceful, except for the senator's body, pale and bloated, being pulled from the water by palace officials. "Clear the room," Kaine ordered. "Now." They obeyed, leaving only Sera and Kaine with the corpse. She moved closer, studying the scene with eyes that had learned to read violence in the fighting pits. The cut was professional. One stroke, deep and sure, severing the major blood vessels without hesitation. The killer knew exactly where to strike. But it was what she didn't sense that made Sera's blood run cold. Every Omega had a scent signature. It was subtle. Most humans couldn't detect it consciously, but alphas could always tell when an Omega had been nearby. It was biology as fundamental as breathing. Here, there was nothing. Just an empty space where an Omega's presence should have been. She was here, Sera whispered, moving around the pool, touching the marble where wet footprints had already dried. But she's been erased somehow. Kaine crouched beside the water, his expression grim. The ritual worked. They actually found a way to make Omegas invisible to us. Sera closed her eyes, trying to sense anything, a trace of emotion, a hint of energy, something her own gifts might catch that normal alpha senses couldn't. For a moment, she felt it, a cold emptiness, like a hole in the world where a person should be. It made her skin crawl. "This is wrong," she said quietly. "Whatever they did to her, it's not natural. It's not right." Back at Kaine's compound, they met with his intelligence officers. The pattern became clear quickly. All 3 murdered senators had been moderates, alphas who'd supported incremental improvements to Omega rights. Not radicals, but reformers. Men who might have actually changed things slowly, carefully, without triggering a violent backlash. "Someone wants war," Kaine said, staring at the map where they'd marked each murder. "Real war, not just oppression. They're killing the very people who could prevent it." One of his officers, a grizzled veteran named Marcus, shook his head. "But who benefits? If alphas and omegas go to war, the empire collapses. Everyone loses." "Not everyone," Sera interjected. All eyes turned to her. True believers. People who think the system is perfect as it is, and any change is a threat. They'd rather burn everything down than see Omegas gain rights. She thought of the alphas who'd bought and sold her, who'd cheered in the fighting pits, who treated Omegas like objects. Not all alphas were like that, Kaine had proved that, but enough were. Enough to form a conspiracy. "They're trying to trigger a crackdown," she continued. "Make it look like Omegas are rising up violently. Give the hardliners an excuse to crush any reform movement permanently." Kaine's expression darkened. "And they're using enslaved Omegas as weapons. Making it look like our kind turned on us, proving their point about Omegas being dangerous." The strategy was brilliant and horrifying. Use the victims as the weapons. Make it impossible for anyone to advocate for Omega rights without looking like they supported assassins. That night, Sera couldn't sleep. She found Kaine on the balcony of his quarters, staring out at the city. Lights glittered in the darkness. Thousands of lives, unaware of how close they were to the edge. "Why do you care?" she asked, moving to stand beside him. "Really care, I mean. Your alpha nobility. This system benefits you. You could ignore all of this. Let it play out and you'd still end up fine." Kaine was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I told you about my mother. What I didn't tell you was..." He paused, his jaw working. "She tried to bond with my father once. Properly, not just the forced connection of slavery. She thought if they had a real bond, he might treat her better, see her as a person." Sera waited, her chest tight. He laughed at her. Kaine continued. "Said true bonds were superstitions, that Omegas didn't have real feelings anyway. That night, I heard her crying through the walls. I was 10 years old, and I understood for the first time that my father was a monster, and that I was being raised to become just like him." His hands gripped the stone railing so hard his knuckles went white. "I've spent my entire life enforcing laws that killed her spirit. Every campaign I led, every city I conquered, I was strengthening the system that broke her. Maybe it's too late for redemption. Probably it is. But I have to try. I have to believe that I can be something other than what he made me." Sera felt something shift inside her, that wall she'd built so carefully cracking wider. She'd been so focused on seeing alphas as a monolith, oppressors, slave owners, the enemy. But Kaine was just a person. A damaged person trying desperately to be better than his raising. Without thinking, she reached out and covered his hand with hers. He went very still, looking down at where her fingers rested on his scarred knuckles. It was the first time she'd willingly touched him outside of necessity, the first time she'd initiated contact with an alpha since she couldn't remember. "It's not too late," she said softly. "If it was too late for you, it would be too late for all of us." Kaine turned his hand over, letting their palms press together. His touch was warm, gentle in a way that made her throat ache. "Sera, I..." The window exploded inward in a shower of glass. They threw themselves apart, Sera rolling across the balcony as a shadow landed where they'd been standing. In the moonlight, she saw a figure dressed all in black, face covered by a mask, twin daggers gleaming in their hands. The assassin. She moved like smoke, impossibly fast, slashing at Kaine, who barely got his sword up in time. The blades met with a screech of metal, and then the assassin was spinning away, coming at Sera. Instinct took over. 23 days in the fighting pits had honed her reflexes to a razor's edge. She ducked under the strike, swept the assassin's legs, but the figure twisted in midair and landed in a crouch. 4-3 heartbeats. They faced each other. Sera and the assassin, both deadly, both survivors. Then the assassin lunged again, and Sera realized with cold horror that she was outmatched. This wasn't just skill. This was supernatural speed, strength beyond what any Omega should have. The ritual had made this killer into something more than human. Kaine shouted, diving between them, his sword blocking a strike that would have opened Sera's throat. The assassin hissed, the first sound she'd made, and vanished back through the broken window, disappearing into the night like she'd never been there at all. Sera and Kaine stood in the shattered glass, breathing hard, staring at each other. "She was here for you," Kaine said hoarsely. "They know you're helping me. They know you're a threat." Sera touched her throat where the blade had nearly struck. Her fingers came away trembling. "Good," she said, forcing steel into her voice. "Let them know. Let them come." But inside, she was terrified, because now she understood. They weren't just hunting a killer. They were hunting someone who could end them both without even trying. Chapter 5. Sister's Shadow. They tripled the guard that night, but Sera knew it wouldn't matter. If the assassin wanted them dead, walls and soldiers wouldn't stop her. The nullification ritual had made these Omegas into ghosts, invisible, unstoppable, perfect weapons. But there was something about the attack that bothered Sera. Something in the way the assassin moved, a familiar quality she couldn't quite place. 3 nights later, she came again. This time, Sera was ready. She'd been sleeping in her clothes, a knife under her pillow, every sense alert. When the window to her quarters opened silently, she was already moving. They collided on the moonlit rooftop, tiles shattering under their feet. The assassin was faster, but Sera had fought for her life too many times to be easily killed. She blocked, dodged, countered, using every dirty trick she'd learned in the pits. Kaine burst through the door seconds later, sword drawn. The assassin spun to face this new threat, and Sera saw her opening. She lunged, tackling the figure around the waist, and they crashed together across the roof. They rolled, fighting for dominance, and Sera's hand caught the edge of the assassin's mask. She yanked hard. The mask came free. The world stopped. Amber eyes, identical to her own, stared back at her. A face she'd seen every day for the first 14 years of her life, younger but unmistakable, framed by dark hair the same shade as Sera's. Lyra? The name escaped her lips as a broken whisper. Her baby sister. Her Lyra, who'd been taken by slavers 8 years ago during a raid on their village. Who Sera had searched for desperately until the Empire captured her too. Who she'd finally, painfully, assumed was dead. Lyra's expression didn't change. Those amber eyes, once so full of life and mischief, were empty now. Hollow. Like looking into a mirror that reflected nothing back. "Sister," Lyra said, her voice mechanical and flat. You should not have involved yourself with the wolf. Then she lunged again, blade aimed straight at Sera's heart. Sera couldn't make herself block properly. Every instinct screamed to defend herself, but her body wouldn't cooperate. This was Lyra, her little sister who used to braid flowers in her hair, who sang constantly, who'd cried when their mother died and held Sera's hand through the funeral. Kaine threw himself between them, taking the blade across his ribs. Blood bloomed across his shirt as he crashed into Lyra, sending them both skidding across the tiles. Sera, fight, he shouted, pain making his voice harsh. Whatever she was, she's not that anymore. But Sera couldn't. She stood frozen, watching as Kaine fought her sister, as Lyra moved with that impossible speed, as her face remained blank and emotionless even as she tried to kill him. Temple guards finally responded to the noise, pouring onto the rooftop with spears and torches. Lyra's head snapped toward them, calculating. Then she looked back at Sera one last time. For just a heartbeat, something flickered in those empty eyes. Confusion, recognition, a ghost of the girl who used to exist. Then it was gone, and Lyra vanished over the edge of the roof, disappearing into the darkness below. Sera ran to the edge, screaming her sister's name, but there was nothing. Just empty air and the distant sounds of the city. Strong hands pulled her back. Kaine, bleeding but alive, his face tight with pain. We need to get you inside, he said. Now. The wound across his ribs was deep, blood soaking through the makeshift bandage Sera wrapped around him with shaking hands. A healer was summoned, stitching the cut while Kaine refused any medicine for the pain. She's in there, Sera said desperately, pacing the room like a caged animal. My sister is still in there. I saw it, just for a second, but I saw her. The real her. Kaine pressed his hand to the wound, his face pale but determined. Then we find who did this to her, and we make them undo it. I promise you, Sera. I promise. The healer finished and left, giving them privacy. Sera sank into a chair, her whole body trembling. 8 years. 8 years she'd thought Lyra was dead, had mourned her, had hardened her heart against that loss. And now she was alive. But worse than dead, turned into a weapon, stripped of everything that made her Lyra. The nullification ritual, Sera whispered. That's what they did to her. Took away her memories, her emotions, herself. Left just a shell. Kaine moved to sit beside her, wincing with emotion. Despite his injury, despite everything, he reached out and took her hand. And this time, Sera didn't pull away. She gripped his hand like it was the only solid thing in a world that had just shattered. We'll save her, he said quietly. All of them. I swear it on my life. Sera looked at him. This alpha general who kept making impossible promises, who kept putting himself in danger for people he didn't have to care about, who'd taken a blade meant for her without hesitation. Why, she asked, her voice breaking. Why do you keep doing this? You could have let her kill me. Solved your Omega problem, moved on. Kaine's dark eyes met hers, and the intensity there made her breath catch. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being a problem to solve. You became everything. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Outside, guards patrolled, and the city slept uneasily. Inside, two people who should have been enemies sat hand in hand, bound by something neither quite understood yet. But before Sera could respond, before she could process what he'd just admitted, a messenger burst through the door. Commander, Senator Marcus has been murdered. And this time, they left a message carved into his chest. The wolf and the warrior die next. Chapter 6. The Magistrate's Web. The trail of blood led them to places Sera wished didn't exist. Following the pattern of disappearances, tracking the money that funded the nullification rituals, bribing informants and threatening officials, it all pointed to one man, Magistrate Drusus. On the surface, he was everything the Empire valued. A respected judicial official, advisor to 3 emperors, known for his fairness and wisdom. His public villa was elegant and refined, filled with art and books, the home of a cultured man of law. His secret basement told a different story. Kaine brought 24 of his most trusted soldiers, surrounding the compound in the dead of night. They'd learned that Drusus was preparing to flee the capital, which meant they had one chance to catch him. The public villa yielded nothing suspicious. But Sera, using the heightened senses that had kept her alive in the fighting pits, detected something wrong about one of the walls in the wine cellar. A hollow sound behind the stone. They found the hidden door. The stairs descended into darkness, so complete it felt alive. Torches revealed a nightmare, a chamber carved from raw stone, walls lined with cages that still held chains and bloodstains. Ritual circles covered the floor, drawn in what Sera desperately hoped wasn't human blood. Shelves held scrolls and artifacts, books of forbidden magic that should have been burned centuries ago. And in the center, an altar stained dark with use. Gods, one of the soldiers whispered, his face going white. Sera moved through the chamber, like she was walking through a dream, or a nightmare. The cages were empty now, the experiments already complete, but she could feel the echoes of suffering. How many Omegas had been brought here? How many had been strapped to that altar and had their very souls ripped away? Kaine found the journals. Dozens of them, meticulously detailed records of every subject, every attempt at the ritual, every failure and success. Drusus had been working on this for years, perfecting the process. He's insane, Marcus said, reading over Kaine's shoulder. Completely insane. No, Sera said quietly, her voice cold as ice. He's not. This is calculated. Methodical. He knew exactly what he was doing. She picked up one of the journals and read aloud. Subject 17 showed promising results. Memory erasure complete, emotional response nullified, bond ability severed. She no longer registers on alpha sensory perception. The weapon is ready for deployment. Subject 17. Not a name, not a person, just a number. One of those numbers was Lyra. They found Drusus in an upper chamber, calmly packing documents into a leather case. He was old, maybe 70, with silver hair and the refined appearance of a scholar. He looked up when they burst in, and his expression showed no fear, only mild annoyance. "Commander Kaine," he said pleasantly. "I must say, you're faster than I expected. I'd hoped to be on a ship by now." Kaine's sword was at the old man's throat in an instant. "Where are they? The Omegas you turned into weapons. Where are they kept?" Drusus smiled. Actually smiled, like he was explaining something to a slow student. "Kept? My dear boy, they're not kept anywhere. They're spread throughout the Empire, living among the population, completely undetectable. Each one has a target list and instructions. They're already carrying out their missions." "Why?" Sera demanded, moving closer despite the guards trying to hold her back. "Why do this? What could possibly justify?" "Justify?" Drusus interrupted, his voice sharp now. "I'm saving the Empire. Don't you see? The bleeding hearts, the reformers, they're destroying everything our ancestors built. Give Omegas rights, they said. Educate them. Treat them like equals." He spat the word like a curse. "Weakness. Dangerous, suicidal weakness." His eyes gleamed with fanatical certainty. The natural order must be preserved. Alphas rule, Omegas serve. That's how it's always been. How it should always be. But these fools wanted to change everything. So I gave them exactly what they feared: Omega violence, Omega uprising. Now the hardliners will crack down, crush the reform movement completely, and the Empire will be strong again. "You're using the victims as weapons," Kaine said, his voice deadly quiet. "You're enslaving Omegas and making them kill for your political agenda." "I'm using tools for their intended purpose," Drusus replied calmly. "Omegas are tools, Commander. Some of us have simply forgotten that." Sera's hand went to her blade. Every fiber of her being screamed to drive it through this monster's heart. To make him pay for Lyra, for all the others, for every sick thing he'd done in the name of his twisted ideology. But Kaine's hand caught her wrist. His eyes met hers, and she saw the same rage burning there, but also control. Justice, not vengeance. "Where is the reversal?" Kaine demanded, turning back to Drusus. How do we undo what you've done? The magistrate laughed. It was a horrible sound, full of genuine amusement. Reversal? There is no reversal, you fool. The nullification ritual is permanent. Those girls are lost forever, perfect servants to the cause. They'll never remember who they were. They'll never feel anything again. They're finally useful. Sera's blade was at his throat before anyone could stop her, pressing hard enough to draw blood. My sister's not lost, she hissed. You will tell us how to save them, or I will spend days keeping you alive while introducing you to every torture technique I learned in the fighting pits. And believe me, old man, I learned a lot. For the first time, real fear showed in Drusus's eyes. He saw the truth in her face. She would do it. She would make him suffer beyond anything he could imagine. The High Priestess, he choked out. In the Temple of Origins, in the Forbidden Waste. She's the one who created the spell. She's the only one who might know a counter-ritual. But she'll never help you. She's as committed to the cause as I am. Kaine pulled Sera back gently. Bind him, he ordered his soldiers. He'll stand trial for treason, murder, and crimes against humanity. If he tries to escape or kill himself, I want him stopped and healed. He'll face justice, not mercy. As they dragged Drusus away, Sera stood in that horrible chamber, surrounded by the evidence of his atrocities. 20 Omegas turned into weapons. 20 girls stolen and destroyed. And somewhere out there, Lyra was one of them, hunting targets she didn't understand for reasons that weren't her own. The Temple of Origins, she said quietly. That's in the Forbidden Waste. Weeks of travel through territory controlled by warlords and worse. Kaine moved to stand beside her, his hand finding hers naturally now. Then we leave at dawn. We find this High Priestess and we get answers. What if there's no cure? Sera asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in her heart. What if Drusus was telling the truth? Kaine turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Then we find a way anyway. We don't give up. Not on your sister, not on any of them. I promise you, Sera, we will save them all. She wanted to believe him, desperately wanted to trust in his strength, his conviction. But standing in that chamber of horrors, feeling the weight of all that suffering, belief felt impossible. Still, she nodded. Because what else could they do but try? As they climbed the stairs back to the world above, leaving that nightmare behind, Sera felt the weight of Kaine's promise settling onto both their shoulders. 20 Omegas to save. An empire on the brink of civil war. And a High Priestess who might be their only hope, or their final enemy. Chapter 7. The Bond Trial. The journey to the Forbidden Waste tested them in ways Sera hadn't expected. Not just physically, though crossing the desert wastes with limited water and hostile territory was brutal, but emotionally. The assassins struck twice more on the road. Once in a small town where they stopped for supplies, a hooded figure trying to poison their water. Kaine caught her just in time, and they managed to subdue her without killing. She was young, maybe 16, with blank eyes and no memory of her name. They left her with a village healer, hoping distance from her target might break whatever programming controlled her. But Sera knew it wouldn't be enough. The second attack came at night in their camp. 3 assassins this time, coordinated and deadly. They barely survived, and 2 of Kaine's soldiers died defending them. Good men with families who'd trusted their commander to keep them safe. Kaine blamed himself. Sera could see it in the way he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, the way his jaw stayed clenched, the guilt eating at him. This isn't your fault, she told him one evening, as they sat by the fire after burying the dead. They died because of me, he said flatly. Because I'm trying to fix a system I helped create. Because I'm asking them to risk everything for Omegas when they've been taught their whole lives that Omegas don't matter. They died because Drusus is a monster, Sera corrected. Because the Empire is rotten to its core. You're trying to fix that. Don't you dare feel guilty for trying to do the right thing. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. When did you become the one giving me hope? Probably around the time you became the one worth believing in, she replied softly. The moment stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them was quite ready to say. Then one of the soldiers called out that he'd spotted the temple in the distance, and the moment broke. But it didn't disappear. It stayed with them, that growing connection neither of them could deny anymore. The Temple of Origins rose from the desert like a fever dream. Half buried in sand, ancient stone columns reaching toward the sky, covered in script older than the Empire itself. Power radiated from it, making Sera's skin prickle with awareness. The High Priestess waited for them at the entrance. She was not what Sera expected, a blind Omega in flowing white robes, ancient beyond counting, her eyes milky white but somehow seeing everything. She moved with liquid grace despite her age, and the air around her shimmered with barely contained magic. "The wolf and the warrior," she said, her voice like wind through reeds. "The prophecy spoke of you both. I've been waiting." Sera's patience, already worn thin by weeks of travel and violence, snapped completely. "I don't care about prophecies. My sister and 19 other girls have been turned into monsters. Fix them." The priestess smiled sadly. "Always so quick to anger, warrior. But anger alone won't save them." She turned and walked into the temple, clearly expecting them to follow. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of incense and ancient magic. Murals covered the walls, depicting the history of Omegas and Alphas, not as masters and slaves, but as equals, partners, two halves of a greater whole. "This is how it was meant to be," the priestess said, gesturing to the art. "Before fear and greed twisted everything. Alphas and Omegas were never meant to be master and slave. We were meant to balance each other, complement each other. True bonds were the norm, not the exception." "How do we break the nullification ritual?" Kaine asked, his military training keeping him focused on the mission. The priestess led them to a chamber deep in the temple's heart, where a circular platform stood surrounded by ethereal blue flames that gave off no heat. The domed ceiling above showed constellations that seemed to move and shift. "The nullification ritual severs an Omega's ability to bond," she explained. "It cuts them off from the fundamental energy that makes us who we are. To break such a spell, you need its opposite, a bond so strong, so pure, that it can't be severed. A true bond." Sera's heart sank. "True bonds are rare. You said so yourself. We can't just. Can't you?" The priestess turned those blind, all-seeing eyes on her. "Look at what you've built already. An Alpha and an Omega, working together as equals, trusting each other, caring for each other, putting each other's safety above your own. Tell me, warrior, is that not the foundation of a true bond?" Sera looked at Kaine. He was watching her with an expression that made her chest tight, hope mixed with fear mixed with something deeper that neither of them had named yet. "The trial is simple," the priestess continued, gesturing to the platform. "Enter the circle together. If your bond is true, if it's built on genuine respect, trust, and choice, the ancient magic will recognize it and grant you the power to break the dark spell. And if it's not?" Kaine asked quietly. The priestess gestured to the floor. Sera looked down and saw old stains in the stone. "Blood. Lots of it. Then the magic will destroy you both," the priestess said simply. "It cannot abide false bonds or lies. You must enter with complete honesty, holding nothing back. The magic will strip away every defense, every secret, every wall you've built. You will see each other's souls, completely and utterly. If you can accept what you see, if you can still choose each other after knowing every dark corner, every shame, every fear, then your bond is true." Sera swallowed hard. The idea of letting anyone see everything, every moment of weakness, every terrible thing she'd done to survive, every secret shame, was terrifying. But then she thought of Lyra, of those blank amber eyes, of 19 other girls just like her, stolen and broken. "What do we have to do?" she asked. The priestess smiled. "Simply enter the circle, hold hands, and open yourselves to the truth." Kaine stepped toward the platform, then turned back to Sera. He extended his hand, not commanding, not demanding, but offering. "A choice." "You trust me?" he asked. Sera thought of everything. The auction block where he'd bought her freedom, not her slavery. His promises kept every single time. The way he'd taken a blade meant for her, without hesitation. The way he looked at her like she was an equal, a partner, someone worth listening to. The way she felt when he was near, safe, seen, valued in a way she'd never experienced before. Unfortunately, she said, taking his hand, I think I do. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and steady. Together, they stepped into the circle. The ancient magic awakened with a roar of power that shook the temple. The blue flames shot higher, engulfing them, and Sera screamed as her mind exploded open. She felt Kaine's consciousness slam into hers. Every memory, every thought, every feeling, all at once. She experienced his childhood as if it were her own. Brutal training under a father who saw weakness as sin, watching his mother fade day by day, learning to fight and kill before he learned to read. She felt his guilt over every campaign, every order, every time he enforced laws he knew were wrong. She felt his desperate hope that maybe, finally, he could be something better than what his world made him. And she felt his love for her. Overwhelming, terrifying, absolute. When had it started? The auction block? The first time she stood up to him? The moment she chose to trust him? It didn't matter. It was there now, blazing through her like fire, making her want to run and stay in equal measure. Kaine experienced Sera's hell in turn. The raid that destroyed her village, slavers grabbing Lyra while she hid like a coward. The auction block where she was first sold at 14, learning quickly that submission meant survival but rebellion meant death. The fighting pits where she chose violence over surrender, where she killed to stay alive, where she became something hard and sharp because soft things broke. He felt her shame at enjoying the violence sometimes, at being good at killing. He felt her loneliness, the hollow emptiness of surviving when everyone she loved was gone. He felt her fear, constant, unending fear, that she was broken beyond repair, that she'd never be able to trust or love or be anything but a weapon. And he felt her love for him too, unexpected, unwanted, impossible to deny. It had crept up on her slowly, in moments of kindness she didn't expect, in promises kept when promises were usually lies, in the way he saw her as a person when everyone else saw an object. They stood in the center of the magic, souls laid bare, every secret exposed. And somehow, impossibly, they didn't break. The chamber exploded with golden light, so bright it hurt to look at. Power surged through them both, connecting them in ways that went beyond thought or emotion. Sera could feel Kaine's heartbeat as if it were her own. He could sense her fear and meet it with his steady strength. When the light faded, they stood changed. The blind priestess bowed deeply. The first time in recorded history that Omega had shown such respect to an Alpha and his bonded Omega. It is done, she said, wonder in her voice. A true bond, forged in choice and fire. You have what you need to save them. How? Sera asked, her voice shaking. She could still feel Kaine in her mind, a warm presence that felt like home. The counter-ritual is simple but costly, the priestess replied. To break the nullification, you must share your true bond with those afflicted. Touch them together, channel your connection into them, and it will restore what was severed. Then let's go, Kaine said. We can save them all. But, the priestess interrupted, her voice heavy with sorrow. Each one you save will weaken your own bond. You must give pieces of your connection to restore theirs. 20 assassins means 20 fragments of your souls. By the time you save the last one, your true bond will be completely severed. You will be just two people who once shared something beautiful. The words hit Sera like a physical blow. They just found this connection that made her feel whole for the first time in her life, and now they had to give it away? She looked at Kaine and saw the same devastation in his eyes. They'd waited lifetimes to find this feeling, this completion, and now they had to sacrifice it. We do it, they said in unison, the words pulled from somewhere deeper than thought. Because love, real love, meant choosing someone else's freedom over your own happiness. It meant looking at Lyra's blank eyes and knowing that saving her was worth losing everything. The priestess bowed again, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. Then go, children. Save your people. And perhaps save your empire. As they left the temple, the true bond singing between them, precious and doomed, Sera felt Kaine's hand tighten around hers. No matter what happens, he said quietly, no matter what we lose, this was worth it. You were worth it. Sera couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she just held his hand tighter and tried to memorize how it felt to be complete. Chapter 8. The Shattering. They found the first assassin in a port city 3 days' ride from the temple. A girl named Mira, cornered by guards after a failed attempt on a general's life. She fought like a demon, blank-eyed and relentless, until Kaine's soldiers managed to net her like a wild animal. Sera and Kaine approached her together, hands clasped, the true bond humming between them like a living thing. What do we do? Sera asked. Touch her, Kaine replied. Together. And let the magic flow. They knelt on either side of Mira, who thrashed against her restraints, still trying to complete her mission even captured. Sera placed one hand on the girl's shoulder. Kaine placed his on the other. The moment they made contact, Sera felt something tear inside her chest. It was like losing a piece of herself, a chunk of her soul being ripped away and poured into Mira. She gasped with the pain of it, feeling the true bond weakening, that perfect connection with Kaine becoming slightly less than it had been. But Mira screamed. Her body convulsed, back arching, and Sera saw the moment the ritual broke. Memories flooded back into the girl's eyes. Pain, confusion, horror at what she'd been made to do. Then recognition, personality, self. All the things that had been stolen returned in a devastating rush. What? Where? Mira collapsed, sobbing. I killed people. Oh gods, I killed people, and I couldn't stop, couldn't remember why it was wrong. You're free now, Sera said gently, even as she felt the hollow ache where part of her bond with Kaine had been. You're yourself again. They left Mira with a trusted healer and continued their hunt. Over the next weeks, they systematically tracked down each assassin. Some were captured. Some came to them, drawn by rumors of a cure. Some fought until the very end, unable to believe freedom was possible. Each rescue tore another piece away. By the 5th girl, Sera could barely feel Kaine's thoughts anymore. By the 10th, the constant awareness of his presence had faded to a whisper. By the 15th, they had to hold hands just to sense each other at all. It was agony watching it die, this beautiful thing they'd found. Like watching the sun set slowly, knowing darkness was coming and being unable to stop it. But they didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because every girl they saved was worth it. Every moment of recognition, of self-returning, of humanity restored, that mattered more than their pain. I'm sorry, Kaine said one night, after they'd saved the 17th girl. They sat by their campfire, holding hands because soon even that wouldn't be enough to feel the bond. I'm sorry we have to lose this. Don't be, Sera replied, though her voice cracked. We knew the price, and we chose to pay it. Doesn't make it hurt less. No, she agreed. It doesn't. They sat in silence, feeling what remained of their connection flickering like a dying flame. Soon it would be gone entirely. Soon they would just be two people who'd once shared something extraordinary. But they'd still have the choice they'd made. The sacrifice they'd willingly given. That mattered too. The Empire burned around them as they worked. Drusus's conspiracy had been exposed, triggering exactly the crisis he'd wanted. Hardline Alphas used the assassinations as proof that Omegas were dangerous, calling for harsher laws. Omegas rose up in protest, and violence erupted in the streets. General Marcellus, a brutal Alpha supremacist, declared himself protector of the Empire and called for both Kaine's and Sera's execution. He gathered an army of true believers, Alphas who'd rather burn the world than see the natural order change. Civil war became inevitable. We could run, Kaine said one night, after saving the 18th girl. Only 2 pieces of the bond remained, barely enough to feel each other's presence. Take what's left of this and disappear. Live quietly, together, away from all this. Sera traced the scars on his hands, memorizing them. And let my sister stay a weapon? Let this system destroy more girls? You know we can't. He did know. Loving her meant he'd known from the beginning that she would choose justice over happiness, duty over desire. It was one of the reasons he loved her. One more after Lyra, he said quietly. One more piece to give away. Then it's gone. Then we'll just have to remember how it felt, Sera replied, and choose each other anyway. They found Lyra during a raid on Marcellus's stronghold. She was his personal weapon, his prized assassin, kept close to protect him from the growing revolution. The battle was brutal. Kaine's forces fought Marcellus's loyalists in the streets of the capital while the city burned. Sera cut through the chaos with single-minded purpose, following the thread of the bond. So faint now, barely a whisper, until she found her sister. Lyra stood in Marcellus's war room, blank-eyed and deadly, surrounded by dead guards she'd killed to protect her master. When she saw Sera, her weapons came up automatically. Last one, Kaine said quietly, appearing at Sera's side. Blood streaked his armor, but he was alive. After this, we're just us, Sera finished. But that's enough. It has to be enough. They approached Lyra together, moving slowly, carefully. She attacked immediately, faster than thought, and they barely managed to catch her wrists. The moment they touched her, channeling the last fragment of their bond, Sera felt the connection snap. That golden thread binding her to Kaine, that perfect understanding, that sense of completion, it severed like a cut rope, and the emptiness was staggering. She gasped with the loss of it, feeling suddenly alone in her own head for the first time in weeks. But then she saw Lyra's eyes clear. Recognition flooded back into those amber eyes. Confusion first, then memory, then understanding. The weapons clattered to the floor. Sera? Lyra whispered, her voice her own again. Is it really you? They collapsed together, sisters reunited after 8 years of horror, sobbing and holding each other like they'd never let go. Kaine stepped back, giving them space, and Sera felt the absence of the bond like a missing limb. But Lyra was alive, was herself, was free. It was worth it. It was worth everything. Around them, the battle reached its climax. Marcellus's forces, seeing their ultimate weapon redeemed, began to surrender. The very thing he'd said was impossible had happened before thousands of eyes. True bonds were real. Alphas and Omegas could be partners, equals. The Empire's foundation cracked forever. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The aftermath of the battle left the capital in ruins. Buildings burned. Bodies filled the streets. The Empire teetered on the edge of complete collapse, and everyone looked to Kaine and Sera for answers. They had none. They were just two people trying to hold together a world that wanted to tear itself apart. Elder Lyris arrived from the hidden villages with Omega warriors, determined to protect the freed assassins. Kaine's remaining soldiers, having witnessed the true bond and its sacrifice, began questioning everything they'd been taught. The freed girls themselves, all 20 of them, broken and healing, became living proof that change was possible. They held a council in the ruins of the Senate building. Alphas and Omegas together, sitting at the same table for the first time in 300 years. The old system is dead, Kaine declared. The question is, what do we build to replace it? Marcellus's remaining supporters shouted for order, for tradition, for maintaining the natural way. But they were outnumbered now. Too many people had seen the truth. We build something better, Sera said, her voice carrying across the chamber. We build a world where bonds are choice, not force. Where Omegas are people, not property. Where both Alphas and Omegas have rights and responsibilities. Impossible, an old senator spat. The system has worked for centuries. The system created monsters like Drusus, Lyra interrupted, speaking publicly for the first time since her rescue. She was thin, haunted, but her voice was strong. The system let him steal us, break us, turn us into weapons. If that's what your system creates, then burn it down and start over. The freed assassins stood behind her, a united front. They'd been through hell and returned, and they would not be silenced. The council lasted for days. Arguments, debates, fights that nearly turned violent. But slowly, painfully, they hammered out the beginnings of new laws. Slavery would be abolished. Omegas would have full legal rights. True bonds would be protected and celebrated. The transition would take years, maybe generations, but it would happen. Throughout it all, Sera and Kaine worked side by side. But everything was different now. Without the bond, Kaine couldn't feel her emotions anymore. Couldn't sense when she was struggling or know instinctively what she needed. He had to ask, had to listen, had to learn her all over again through words and actions instead of that perfect understanding. Strangely, it felt more real. "I can't sense what you're thinking," he said one evening as they reviewed documents in what had become their shared office. "It's harder than I expected." "Good," Sera replied, not looking up from her papers. "You should have to work for it like everyone else."
He smiled at that.
"Fair enough." He set down his pen. "Then let me ask, how are you? Really?" Sera finally looked at him. Without the bond, she couldn't feel his emotions either. Couldn't sense his worry or his care. She had to trust that it was there based on his actions, his words, his choices. "I miss it," she admitted quietly. "That connection. Knowing you were always there, always present. But," she paused, searching for the right words. "The bond made us love each other. Or, at least, it made loving inevitable. Now we have to choose it. Every day, actively choose each other. And that feels more honest somehow." "Does it?"
Kaine asked.
"Even though it's harder?" "Especially because it's harder," Sera replied. "Love shouldn't be easy. Not real love. It should be work and choice and deciding every day that this person is worth it." She stood and moved around the desk to stand in front of him. "I loved you because the bond made me. But I love you now because I choose to. And that matters more." Kaine reached out and took her hand, a gesture that didn't come with automatic understanding anymore, just human touch and hope. "Then I guess we're stuck with each other," he said softly. "I guess we are, Wolf." But they still had work to do. Marcellus had fled the capital, taking loyalists with him. He was gathering forces in the north, preparing for a final stand. The war wasn't over yet. "He won't stop," Marcus reported during a military council. "He's calling for all true believers to join him, promising to restore the old ways by force." "Then we end this," Kaine said, "once and for all." They marched north with an army unlike any the Empire had ever seen. Alphas and Omegas fighting together, former slaves and former masters united by a common cause. The freed assassins rode with them, choosing to fight for the world they wanted to build. Lyra stayed close to Sera, relearning how to be herself. "Thank you," she said quietly one night around the campfire, "for not giving up on me, for sacrificing your bond to save us." Sera hugged her sister tight. "You're worth more than any bond. You always were." As they approached Marcellus's stronghold, Sera found Kaine standing alone, staring at the fortress in the distance. "Last battle," he said when she joined him. "After this, we can finally start building instead of fighting." "You think it'll be that simple?" Sera asked. "That we beat Marcellus and suddenly everyone accepts the new order?" "No," Kaine admitted. "It'll take years. Decades, probably. But we have to start somewhere." He looked at her, his expression serious. "And I want to do it with you. Not as commander and whatever you were, but as partners. Equals. Building something better together." Sera felt her chest tighten. Without the bond, declarations like this felt more vulnerable, more real. He was offering her a future built on choice, not magical connection. "Partners," she agreed. "I like the sound of that." The battle began at dawn. Marcellus's forces held the high ground, fortified behind thick walls. But Kaine's army had something they didn't: unity born of belief, not coercion. Alphas and Omegas fought side by side, protecting each other, trusting each other. Sera led a strike team through a secret entrance, information provided by a servant who'd fled Marcellus's cruelty. They moved through tunnels beneath the fortress, emerging in the heart of the stronghold. And there she was, Lyra, moving ahead of the group with deadly grace, every movement speaking of the killer she'd been forced to become. But her eyes were clear now. She chose this fight. "Thank you for coming back for me," Lyra said quietly as they climbed the stairs toward Marcellus's command center. "For not leaving me as a weapon." "Always," Sera replied. "You're my sister. I'll always come for you." They found Marcellus in his war room, surrounded by his most loyal guards. The general was older than Kaine, maybe 50, with silver in his hair and scars covering his hands. He looked at them with contempt. "The traitor and his pet Omega," he sneered. "Come to beg for mercy?" "We came to offer you a choice," Kaine said calmly. "Surrender now. Face trial. Help us rebuild. Or fight and die here, and everything you believed in dies with you." Marcellus laughed. "I'd rather die than see our empire become a playground for Omega filth. The natural order." "There is no natural order," Sera shouted. "There's just people. People who deserve dignity and choice and freedom. That's what we're building. Join us or get out of the way." "Never." Marcellus drew his sword, and his guards moved to surround them. The room erupted into violence. Sera had fought in the pits for 23 days. She'd survived assassination attempts, battles, and horrors that would have broken most people. But this fight was different. This was for everything, for Lyra, for all the freed assassins, for every Omega who'd ever been told they were less than human. She fought like fury itself. Beside her, Kaine moved with the precision of a master warrior. And Lyra, broken, healed Lyra, fought with them both, protecting her sisters back the way Sera had once protected hers. When Marcellus fell, his sword clattering across the stone floor, the battle ended. Outside, his forces saw their general defeated and began laying down arms. The war was over. Chapter 10. The Price of Freedom. They stood on the steps of the Imperial Palace 3 months later, before a crowd of thousands. Alphas and Omegas mixed together, no longer separated by law or custom. Broken chains lay scattered on the ground, a symbolic gesture, but a powerful one. Sera held Kaine's hand, not because a magical bond compelled her, but because she chose to. The new council had been formed, half Alphas, half Omegas, elected by the people. It wasn't perfect. Nothing would be perfect overnight, but it was a start. The first laws had been passed, officially ending slavery and granting full rights to all Omegas. Elder Lyra stood with them, representing the hidden villages that were hidden no more. The freed assassins stood there too, 20 young women who'd been broken and remade, now choosing to help others heal. And Lyra, beautiful, scarred Lyra, stood beside Sera, holding her hand on the other side. "We did it," Lyra whispered. "We actually did it." "We started it," Sera corrected. "The real work is just beginning." Kaine stepped forward to address the crowd. His voice carried across the plaza, strong and certain. 300 years ago, our empire was built on a lie, that some people were meant to rule and others meant to serve. That lie created a system of slavery, suffering, and injustice that has poisoned us for generations. He paused, letting the words sink in. Today, we end that lie. Today, we begin building something new. Not perfect. Perfection is impossible, but better. A world where every person, Alpha and Omega alike, has the right to choose their own path. Where bonds are formed by love, not force. Where we judge people by their character, not their biology. The crowd erupted in cheers. Not everyone, there were still skeptics, still people who clung to the old ways. But enough people believed. Enough to make change possible. Sera stepped forward next. Public speaking terrified her in ways that fighting never had, but this mattered too much to let fear win. "I was a slave," she said, her voice shaking at first, then growing stronger. "Sold at 14. Forced to fight in pits for entertainment. I survived by becoming hard, by trusting no one, by believing that all Alphas were my enemies." She looked at Kaine, and despite everything, despite the bond being gone, despite all the pain and loss, she smiled. "Then I met an Alpha who proved me wrong, who showed me that change was possible. who sacrificed everything to help free people he'd been taught to see as property. He's not special because he's alpha. He's special because he chose to be better than what his world made him. She turned back to the crowd. That's what we're asking of all of you. Choose to be better. Choose to see each other as people. Choose to build a world worth living in. It won't be easy. It won't happen overnight. But it will happen. We'll make it happen. Together. More cheers. More hope. More possibility than Sera had ever imagined could exist. After the speeches, after the celebration, they found a quiet moment alone on a palace balcony. The city spread out before them, lights beginning to glow as evening fell. Do you regret it? Kaine asked quietly. Giving up the bond?
Sera thought about it. Really thought about it.
She remembered that perfect connection, knowing his thoughts and feelings, the completion of having him in her mind. It had been beautiful, but this was real. No, she said finally. The bond was a gift. But this, choosing you every day, learning you through words and actions, having to work for understanding, this is better. This is us, not magic. Kaine turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. I loved you because the bond made it inevitable. But I love you now because every morning I wake up and decide you're worth fighting for. Every day, I choose you. And I'll keep choosing you, for as long as you'll have me. That's the wolf I fell for, Sera said softly. The one who makes promises and keeps them. He kissed her then, not their first kiss, but the first one that was entirely their choice, with no magic influencing their feelings. Just two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and decided to build something beautiful from the ashes. What happens now? Kaine asked when they finally broke apart. Sera smiled. Now we get to work. Laws to write, systems to dismantle, people to educate. It'll take decades. Maybe generations. Sounds exhausting, Kaine said, but he was smiling too. Probably. But I can't think of anyone I'd rather be exhausted with. They stood together as the sun set, watching their city, their empire, begin the long, difficult process of transformation. The freed assassins would need years of healing. The old systems wouldn't die without a fight. There would be setbacks and failures and moments when it seemed impossible. But they'd already done the impossible. They'd formed a true bond and sacrificed it to free the enslaved. They'd started a revolution. They'd proven that alphas and omegas could be partners, equals, friends. Lyra found them there, looking stronger every day as she healed. The council wants to meet tomorrow to discuss education reforms. They're asking for both of you. Tell them we'll be there, Sera said. Then, softer. How are you doing? Really? Lyra smiled, still fragile, still rebuilding herself, but genuine. Better. Some days are harder than others. But I'm here. I'm me. And I'm going to make sure no one else goes through what I did. She'd already started working with the other freed assassins, forming a support network for survivors. They were turning their pain into purpose, their trauma into change. After Lyra left, Sera leaned against Kaine, feeling the solid warmth of him.
Real.
Chosen. Hers not because of magic, but because they decided to be each other's. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For seeing me as a person when everyone else saw property. For keeping your promises. For being worth believing in. Kaine pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Thank you for teaching me what courage really looks like. For showing me that being strong means choosing mercy, not cruelty. For being patient while I learned to be better. They stayed there as stars emerged above the city, two people who'd lost everything and gained something more valuable. The freedom to choose. To love. To build a future together. The empire would take generations to heal. Laws had to be rewritten, systems rebuilt, prejudices confronted. There would be resistance from those who clung to the old ways. There would be setbacks and struggles and moments of doubt. But for the first time in 300 years, Omegas wore no chains. True bonds were celebrated instead of outlawed. And at the center of it all, a warrior and a general proved that love, real love, built on choice and sacrifice, was always worth the cost. The Scarlet Omega had survived the fighting pits, broken free of her chains, and helped tear down an empire built on suffering. Now she would help build something better. And she wouldn't do it alone.